Hi, and welcome to this episode of the Broke Girl Society podcast. And today we have Stacey, who is the girl gambler. She's got a book out and she's just doing some really amazing things in the advocacy community for spreading awareness of this gambling addiction. So let's say hello to Stacey.
Hi.
Okay, so can you kind of just give us a rundown of your story?
Yeah, definitely. My name's Stacey, as you said, and I started gambling at 18. I got a job in a bookmaker's, and prior to working there, I'd never even really thought about gambling. I think I bought a scratch card once, but I'd never been into a bookies or been online or anything like that. So working in there kind of launched me into the industry. And I saw people who struggled day in, day out, and I always thought, oh, like that would never happen to me. I would never put my money in one of those machines. And I continued working there for a few months. And one day I was with my friend and I decided to just put a couple of pound in a machine and thought, what harm can it do? And quite ironically, I won and I got a buzz and I got a thrill out of it. I wondered what would happen if I put more on. And that's where it started for me. I can remember that exact bet. And for me, it was always the machines, it was always slots. I wasn't interested in anything else. And there's a lot of research to say that the way that the slots are kind of built, they attack a certain part of your brain, and that's why in some cases women especially get addicted to the slots so badly. But yeah, it went from kind of a couple of pound, and I started going in betting shops and timing how long I would be in there so that I wouldn't cause any suspicion. Because from working there myself, I knew that it was unusual for an 18-year-old girl to be sat at a machine in a bookmaker's. You just never saw it. So I would plan my whole day out in going to bookmaker after bookmaker after bookmaker, trying to avoid any suspicion. And I would get through £500 a day at that point. Um, and I knew it was getting a problem, but I couldn't stop. And it was through the shame and guilt that I actually went online because I found it was so much easier. Nobody could see what I was doing. And it was very easy for me to transfer my entire wage. And so for the next 8 years, that's exactly what I did. Every payday was spent on gambling. I had nothing to pay my rent, my bills. I couldn't even afford to eat. Um, I had anorexia throughout my teens, and I was actually thinner during my gambling addiction than when I had anorexia. And I was just so low. I was absolutely trapped. I couldn't escape it. I genuinely thought I was the only woman in the world that was going through this. I never saw anybody anywhere where another woman had been through it and spoke about it. And so believing wholeheartedly that I was the only woman in the world to go through this, I made an attempt to take my own life. And it was from there, and also following a big win. So I did have a big win and I lost it immediately. And that's when I realized this isn't about money. It's got nothing to do with money, actually. I fooled myself into thinking that money would fix everything and make everything better. And I chased this jackpot for so many years, and then I finally got it and I lost it straight away. And so I realized it couldn't have been about money. Um, and so luckily for me, I found a rehab facility here in the UK that dealt with women especially, but I had to go out and look for that. That's never on an advert put in front of you on TV like the adverts for betting. No, I had to go out and really look for that and go through an application process. But luckily I was accepted, and finding other women who'd been through the same and knew what I was talking about, that made the difference in my recovery. And so yeah, I've been 2 years gamble free now following that. Absolutely amazing, never been happier, and I'm on a mission to get people talking about this and say, do you know what, women suffer too. This isn't an addiction that only affects men, it does affect women, but we're so guilted and shamed by it that we just don't talk about it. And that's the kind of barrier I'm trying to break through at the moment with social media and just getting my message out there and saying, do you know what, this does affect women too.
Yeah, absolutely. And your story, even though we are different ages and different parts of the world, is so very similar to mine. I mean, I experienced the same, the guilt, the shame, spending all my paycheck. I didn't gamble every day. I gambled on paydays, when my husband got paid or I got paid. Um, and I wasn't paying my bills. It just took over everything. And
Mhm.
I became a person that I never thought I would be. The good thing about recovery is when you first start recovery, you don't really know your truth anymore. You don't know what's true, what's not true, because you've just told yourself so many lies and justifications of why you've done what you've done. That the good thing about recovery is you do find your truth again. And that's been probably one of the most amazing things, aside from, not having as many of the struggles. I'm still early recovery, so I've got some hurdles, but it's nice to know that we're not alone.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing here. You don't see, when I first started my journey, and for somebody that's gambled 15 years, you would think I would have come across some kind of help information. Now I only did slots too. That's all I did. I didn't even know how many other ways of gambling there are. And since I started this with the Broke Girl Society, I have come across so many different forms of gambling that I never even thought about.
Yeah.
Um, but there's a 1-800 number that is on the door when you go into the casino. I never even knew what the number was. I would just glance at, thinking, like, who's going to call that number as you're walking into the casino? I've never seen anybody stop and write it down. I've
Yeah.
never
Yeah.
seen anybody think twice about calling it. And really, I didn't even call that number. I ended up calling a different number and started some online meetings, and that kind of started my path to recovery. Now, and I think too, especially with the most common programs, the Gamblers Anonymous programs and things like that, is it is really scary to walk in and to complete strangers. And you're
Yeah.
thinking you're the only person in the world that's having this issue. Like, there's no way anybody could relate to the struggles I'm having. And, I was fortunate to be surrounded by a lot of really good people in my local GA meeting. And that feeling, that moment when you hear somebody tell a story and you're like, yes, it just took like these pounds, this weight off of me.
When I went into rehab and I was in a room with maybe 10 other women and it was silent. It was so strange because we were in rehab for gambling. Like, we all knew why we were there, but we were still in that mindset of, you can't talk about this. So the room was silent. And when people started talking, you could literally feel, like you said, like it felt like the weight of the world had just fallen off, because there was
Mhm.
no more lies, there was no more painting a smile on. It was talking to people that actually knew and actually had been through the same. And that was hugely important in my recovery. And I think you made a really good point as well about losing yourself. And people ask me all the time what my biggest loss was, and I will never ever tell you that it's money, because it wasn't. My biggest loss was probably losing myself. I had no idea who I was. I couldn't hold a conversation. I didn't know what truth anymore was, exactly as you said. I'd told that many lies to that many people, including myself, that I wasn't even on this planet. All I could think about was gambling and getting to my next bet, and how was I going to clean up the mess that I'd left, how was I going to eat, and then focusing maybe even more on hiding that from the world. So just knowing that there's other people that it affects in the same way was absolutely huge. It really, really was, and probably one of the most important moments of my recovery.
Yeah, and they say talking about it is probably one of the most healing aspects of recovery for compulsive gambling. And I would 100% say that, because it took me going into the online communities and the social medias and meeting so many women, because in my GA groups it's male dominated, and a lot of them are,
Yeah.
and I think that's why a lot of women don't feel comfortable going to them. Um,
Hmm.
but on the online communities, there's so many women. I mean, we both have online communities within Facebook and other social medias. And you see the same stories, and these women are struggling, and everything they're going through, we've been through. And I just wish there was more voices out there to keep these women from going so much further down the road in shame and secrecy. And I know there's so many factors that play into why we keep silent. It could be loss of job if we talk about it. It could be, depending on what you do for a living. It could be, loss of marriage. It could be just loss of family and friends, and the fear of judgment in general, right? That's one of your,
absolutely.
yeah.
And I think the amount of women that have come forward to me is just unbelievable, and they all say the same, that they're scared of somebody finding out, or scared of the partner or the husband finding out, or somebody will disown them. And I always try and get this across on whenever I speak, is that I had those same feelings. I lived with my best friend for most of my 20s, I think, and she still had no idea because I was too scared to tell her. I didn't tell partners, I didn't tell anybody, because I feared that, I didn't tell work, I feared that it would create this atmosphere or this problem or this argument somewhere. And actually, when it came down to it and I had to tell those people, nobody went off the way that I thought they would go off. Nobody reacted in the way that I thought they would react. Not everybody understood, and I think it's really hard if you've never been through it to understand, and I have to accept that people won't even I didn't understand, so I couldn't expect other people to. But nobody sat and screamed at me, nobody left me on the street, nobody. They were all empathetic and they tried to understand. And I think it's because of how much we hate ourselves in that moment, in that time, that we believe that that is what everybody else is going to think about us for what we're doing. And the reality for me was that, in actual fact, like I said, although some people didn't understand, nobody fell out with me for it, nobody disowned me, I didn't lose my job, it was supportive. And so it's like I said, I truly believe it was because of how much I hated myself at that time, that I think I thought other people would feel the same about me as I did. And so it's important to know that actually people are kinder than we give them credit for in most instances, and they will try to understand and they will try and help.
I was so scared that people were just going to walk away from me, but in truth, the people that were going to walk away from me already did. The people that were in my life were there because that's they were family. They weren't leaving me for anything, and we don't give them enough credit. And it's like my sister, when I told her, she said, when you don't tell people, you're not giving them a chance to help you, but in my mind, it was like, by not telling people, I'm not giving them a chance to walk away or judge me. That's how we think. But like my sister, who has never dealt with an addiction, she's my twin. She said, when you don't talk about it, you don't give anybody the chance to help you and love you and, get you through this. And it's so very true now. But when you're in the midst of it, you just can't convince yourself of that. So maybe us talking about it and getting it out there, maybe we'll start women thinking in that direction, like, okay, maybe I'm not giving them enough credit. Maybe they can help me.
Yeah, that's so powerful as well. Like, that's a really, really nice way of putting it in. And it's exactly as you said, we've already created in our own mind the scenario that will happen through our own guilt and shame. And actually that's not what other people are feeling. They don't go through the kind of sitting at home and gambling and worrying about everything. They'll just worry about you. And that's what they did. And there was a genuine want to help there when I did tell them. So I think that's a really powerful way of putting it. Is like, you're not giving anybody a chance to help. And even if I look at what we're doing now, through kind of social media and stuff like you said, it's over 200 people now. It'll be way over that now, that have reached out to me, and it's through the fact that I spoke about it, and because I recovered, that actually I'm now able to help so many other people. Had I not found and it does take courage, it absolutely does. I hid for 8 years, but had I not have gone through that, there would be all of these women who had nobody to relate to, and that keeps pushing me on every day to say, do you know what I want? And I think the most powerful thing anybody can do if they're in a good place in their life is look back and think, when I wasn't so good, when I was in my lowest place, what do I wish I had? And for me, it was a woman to relate to talk to. And so that's what I'm trying to put back in, so that somebody, 18-year-old me, if she's living a life again somewhere, she doesn't have to go through that period without somebody. And that's what I'll continue to try to do, because it's what I needed.
Yeah. And wouldn't it be great if, further down the line, we get the word out and we can save women going through this, just by us sharing our stories and talking about it.
Yeah, no, it's there's nothing quite like, and you will know this more than most. One reference I always use is when I talk to people, I always think one of the most harrowing parts for me was waking up and suddenly remembering and having that feeling in your stomach that like pulls you down to the center of the earth. And the only people who I can talk to who will know truly what I mean when I say that is people who've been through it, people who have felt it. And there's something so special in seeing in somebody's face or hearing in their voice that they do understand that and they have felt it and that we got through it. And you can't feel that you could be the best kind of psychologist, whatever in the world, you could have read about it 100 times, but if you've not felt that, then you can never truly know. Well, that's not to say they can't help, but they can never truly know. And there's something so special about finding somebody who genuinely knows what you mean when you explain that to them.
Yes, absolutely. I remember when I was having a discussion with my sister, she was directly affected by my gambling, but she'll never truly understand what it's like to lose that side of yourself, to really just lose your integrity and those things that should be important, and we can't seem to regain our footing. We can't seem to beat this, but you can. It takes a lot of work.
Absolutely, you can. You definitely can.
And what's kind of great about your book, when I read it, and I just have to say, I've been following you since probably the beginning of my journey, which was in January of this year. I've been following your, I think it's January, maybe March of this year. I started in January, but your social media accounts, I think I found you on TikTok, actually.
Oh, yeah.
And then you have quite a following on TikTok. And then I found you on Instagram, and then again in Facebook. So I've been following your journey. And when I read your book, there's so much of myself in your book. I have 3 sisters, and my mom was my biggest supporter. She's the one that I went to. And I'm married, and I still chose to go to my mom. And because I knew out of anybody on this planet that would love me no matter what I told her, it was her.
Yeah.
So I really resonated with that. But also found myself when I was reading your book, like I was waiting to turn the page because I knew exactly how it was going to go down, when you were talking about your situations in gambling and things like that. Like I just knew what you were going to say next because I'd lived it myself. And so, I gobbled down that book. It was so amazing to read something that I could feel just as deeply.
And that is the exact feedback from, I think, nearly everybody who's read it and has reached out to me to let me know that they've read it, is the exact feedback. That was something I started during the first lockdown, and I was watching TV and the adverts were bothering me and I had to turn them off. It was during a football match, and I thought, I need something not only to deal with an urge, but how many other people are struggling with this? And so I just started to write my story, and it's very, very real and very raw, but so many people have said that this is like looking in a mirror. This is like reading my own story. And that's again where something special comes here, because that you can see now on black and white that somebody has been through the same, the way that you can relate to it, and like I said, putting that down somewhere and letting just anybody know that you're not alone and somebody else has been through this too is so powerful. And it's highlighted to me as well that so many women have been through this, women and men, but so many women have been through exactly the same. I'm talking to you now, and 7, 8 years ago, I thought that there was nobody in the world that had ever been through this, and here I am speaking to somebody who knows exactly what I'm talking about, and it's so powerful, and has helped so many, and I couldn't be more proud of it. I really couldn't.
Yeah, I couldn't either. That's a huge, I believe that's one of the biggest steps in the right direction. And I think, you're really the only one that I've come across. And I've come across, there are some women advocating here in the States. But it takes some digging to come across them.
Yeah.
And but you were the first one I came across that was really, really just putting yourself out there. You were opening up, taking yourself to this extremely vulnerable place where you're opening yourself up for people to attack you almost, or attack your character, which is a big thing here in the States. They think if you're a gambler, you're morally corrupt. Especially the area I'm in what we call the Bible Belt. And it's just, there's a church on every corner. And, that's not saying anything towards your religion or anything like that. That's just the overwhelming feeling and emotion people have towards that. And it's, that's obviously not true.
It comes down to lack of understanding. So one of the things that helped me massively when I was in my recovery was I was quite closed emotionally, and I think probably most gamblers will say the same, because you go through so many emotions and you try and stop people from knowing that you build these walls. And so when I kind of started my counselling and they wanted to dig deep into why I was gambling, and I'm so glad I did that now, but I still had my walls up. I was like, no, it's got nothing to do with what happened to me when I was a child. I gamble because I gamble, and I fell into this trap. And so they taught me the science behind it as well. And they taught me that it attacks a section of your brain, and it's so hard to give up, or it feels like it's so hard to give up, because it's actually the reward system of your brain that's affected by gambling. And it's a physical reaction that you have, and it's a physical chemical, which is the dopamine, which is released when you gamble. And it was understanding that physical part of it for me that kind of led me to think this is a physical problem. Like, there's something going on here that's outside just of my mind. There is a physical reaction happening in my body, and it's actually proven that when this part of your brain is kind of lit up, it can lead you to lie. It will lead you to manipulative behavior. And so understanding for me that was hugely important for me as well, kind of knowing that this isn't all just in my head, this isn't all just my own thoughts, there's a physical reaction here. And just like a drug user may inject drugs into the body, we understand that is a physical reaction that's happening in their body, and they need support for that. And what people don't see with gambling, and that's why it's so dangerous, you don't see the drug that's being used, you don't see the effects, you don't see what it leads you to. And I think it's that lack of understanding that leads people to believe you are just making bad choices, when it's so much more than.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when they say, well, why don't you just stop? Like, has
Yeah.
anybody ever said that to you? Like, why
All
why
the
don't
time.
you just stop? You're like,
Yeah, I got so many like, have you, maybe you should just not do it anymore, or what, why don't you just stop, like you said. And again, it just comes down to that lack of understanding. And that's
yeah.
why I have so much respect for my mum, because I hurt my mum over and over again during my addiction. And I would lie, I would steal, I would do things that I would never ever dream of doing when I'm in my normal state, which is this. But she never turned her back on me, and she actually decided to learn about addiction and how it works, and also the emotional and mental side of addiction as well, which is a huge part of it, as we know. And I have so much respect for her doing that, because it enabled her to not only help me, but she helps others now in understanding that this isn't always as clear cut as a choice. it is not, shall I gamble today or shall I not? There is so much more to it than that. And that she took that step to try and learn that and understand that and then use that to help people. She's my absolute hero.
Oh, I feel the same way about my mother too. She
Mhm.
did something very similar, and yeah, she between her and my twin sister, they probably were hurt the most by my gambling. But my
Mm.
mom went as far as like taking the games off her phone. You know, I know there's a lot of people out there that aren't as blessed as we are. So it's important that we create a network, you know,
Yeah,
of hope
yeah,
and encouragement for these women who are really struggling with this. So
absolutely. And I think a lot of it comes down to as well, like, even though I had the support in my mum, I still hid it from her because I was shamed. And when we do look at the emotional side and understanding that loneliness is a big part of gambling, it's making sure that everybody does have that point of support, and that's something that obviously together, with what we're both doing with our different things, we're making sure that there's something somewhere a woman can hear or a woman can reach out and speak to. And while it might not be the mum or the best friend, they've got somebody somewhere who just knows what they're talking about. And it's beautiful, really, that for all the differences that everybody has in the world, it seems that addiction um actually has so many similarities that it brings people who you would never imagine together. I mean, I don't wish it on anybody, but it does have the power of these people have been through the same and they can talk to each other, and there's no shame, there's no guilt, there's no judgment, which is a big thing, as you said. And it sounds like where you are, unfortunately, there's still quite a lot of that at the moment. And so breaking through that, I created a safe place um for women to talk and be open about it. And there's just so much relief when you're able to do that. And that's what we together can make sure that everybody listening, or anybody who thinks, do you know what, yeah, they have somewhere to just write even a sentence down. There's so much weight that can travel with just a few words, and making sure they've got a safe place to do that.
yeah, most definitely. I believe there's a purpose for all of us. And as much as I hate this addiction and I hate that people are struggling with it because it is so devastating. I mean, all the way down to family lives, financial lives, but all the way their life in general. But here's the thing is this has made me see humanity in a whole different side. Does that make sense? Like
Yeah,
I never thought
yeah,
of myself
yeah.
as an addict. And you know, when I thought of addicts, I would think of drug and alcohol, you know, because that's just what's been around for so long. This gambling addiction,
Mm,
it is becoming more prominent because of technology.
yeah.
You know, now they
Oh
can
yeah,
gamble
yeah,
online.
100%. Yeah.
The games, you know, it starts younger with the gaming, you know, and it's starting people younger. It used to be something that was older men, you know, and now and then it was just older women who are kind of in their retirement phases, empty nest phases, you know, process. But what I did also notice is when I started my social media account, I did kind of get addicted to the likes and the data girls and things like that. You know, you're still chasing that high because it almost gives
Yeah.
you the same kind of high.
Companies know that as well. They know that we are addicted to getting X amount of likes or this, because too many people believe that it's a show of popularity or show of how nice you are, or some kind of um worthiness of yourself and measurement of yourself that is untrue. But once again, we're allowed to inject money into that just keeps us chasing this unrealistic image. Whereas somebody who has 4 likes on something and no followers has no is no better than me. They're not, and I will never allow that to be a judgment for anything. I have very luckily a large following, but that's because people are interested in what I'm doing, and a lot of those people need support. But I will never grade myself on how many. If I get something that doesn't do well, it doesn't do well. I won't inject money into it to try and justify what I'm doing, because I know that it's so much more than it appears. And like you said, taking yourself away and looking back at your family, who's actually there? Who are these people who are liking it, who maybe you might not meet, or they don't? It's stepping back, like you said, and having a look at what's around you and knowing that that's where you are, that's who you are, and protecting your recovery at all costs.
And I think people know the difference too. I think people know the difference of whether you're there for the right reasons. And,
Mm.
like for you, authentic, you're very authentic, and it shows that you're very passionate about helping others. It's not about anything other than that. And I had to kind of learn in this, and, I'm just being honest. When I started all this, is I just kind of had to learn that if you only help one person, you help that person, and it has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with the timing, and that person hears what they need to hear to help them change their life.
And that's why I think that people scrolling through TikTok, maybe having a hard time, may run out of money if they see a video or they hear a podcast or whatever it might be. It's the timing of it that says, okay, I relate to this. Let's go and do something about it.
Yeah, and to see that other people have. So I always tell women, go in with a realistic expectation of what recovery is going to look like. It's not going to be easy, especially for somebody like me who's gambled for so long, and I've got so many things to shift through. And the financial aspect for me is still extremely overwhelming, and it will be probably for the next several years. But yeah, so that's just a big thing that I always try and tell women is, if you go in thinking it's going to be perfect, that instantly things are going to change, you're just setting yourself up to relapse and slip.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite open, and I spoke in my book that I did have a relapse, and I realized what wasn't in place for me. And even more importantly than that, I will get, as you said, women come forward who are absolutely ready. They've had enough. They've had enough of the gambling. They've had enough of losing their money. But another important part of recovery is understanding what you were replacing with gambling anyway, because I don't believe for one second that there are many people, if you've been doing it a long time, you generally gamble for quite a while before you look to go into recovery anyway, and at that point you are covering something else up with your gambling, whether that be a feeling of loneliness, whether that be something that happened previously, whether it just that you don't cope very well with stressful situations. It's a number of things, and although you can take the gambling away, you're then left with this kind of this openness that you were covering with gambling before, and you have to face that head on and say, okay, this is something else that I need to deal with. So you will very often find that people can put these blockers in place to stop the gambling so that won't happen, but then they're faced with something that they were scared enough in the first place of dealing with that they moved to gambling to do it. So you have to be ready to have a good look at yourself and say, okay, I think this was something that used to make me want to gamble, and I've now got to deal with that. And as you said, it's not easy, but it's so worth it once it's done. It really is.
Yeah, that I come across a lot of women who, they've put up the blockers, as you said, they've made it to where they can't gamble, but they're still struggling because they're not doing the deep work. You've got to figure out what your triggers are. What is causing this? Whatever it is, it could just be that you have a bad home life and don't want to be home. Whatever it is still going to be there when you take the gambling away. So learning to cope with that and process it and deal with it is going to be the base of your recovery.
Yeah, 100%. I want to do some research as well at the moment that I'm looking into about and this is another kind of thing that I think we need women's groups for, and to talk about these things. But I suffer horrendously with my periods, and I always have, and I struggle hugely with PMS and going into a state of depression, absolute depression on the build up to that. And so the link actually between that and things like postnatal depression and domestic abuse and dangerous and addictive behavior in women, there's a huge link there, and that needs looking into too, because that's another physical change in our body that affects us and leads us to do things that in the other 3 weeks of the month we may not feel like that anymore. And so getting the right support for there as well. Sometimes I will sit and I did a post the other day, I just felt terrible and nothing had happened. There was nothing completely bad going on in my life or anything like that. And And obviously throughout my recovery, I've learned to just take a couple of minutes and have a look at this thought and understand where it's coming from. And I looked at my calendar and it was that time. And I was like, I understand why I'm going through this now, but that is enough. That feeling and waking up and having that feeling was enough pre-recovery to lead me to gamble. And so that's why I think that it's so important that women have somewhere they can go when they are struggling, and they're just struggling because of these changes. There's nothing dramatic going on right now. There's nothing they can speak of. They don't know why they feel, and just a place to talk through that. And it might be that in a week's time they feel completely different, but that's the importance of having these kind of open chats and places where women can go when they just don't know themselves.
Yeah, because when you look at how men recover versus how women recover, well, men don't have the emotional roller coaster that women do. I think that's why a lot of times it takes women so many tries to start recovery, because of just trying to figure out the emotional roller coaster of it. Because if you lose your money in one night, okay, and it's right at the start of your cycle, and your emotions are going to be all over the place, right? You're going to be like, oh, I hate this. I can't do this again. And then a week later, when things start to level out, then they're right back like, okay, it's not as bad as I thought it was. But in reality, it was. But they're able to convince themselves otherwise because they're in a better mind frame. But that's something that people don't talk about either. And why there needs to be more diversity in the gambling recovery community.
Yeah,
especially here in the States. So, well, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on here with somebody you don't even know, with some random little podcast that you never know what's going to happen with. And it means a lot to me.
No, and it does mean, like I said, if there's anything I can ever do, that's, like I said earlier, the beauty is that you don't have to know someone, you don't even have to see someone, you don't have to be in the same part of the world, but going through what we've been through, just immediately you have a connection and an understanding. And the more people, and especially women, that we can let know that and are welcome in a safe place where they can share and offload and begin recovery, that I will always be here to support anything that does that for other people.
And you don't know how many women I know appreciate that, because I know I did when I would come across your post and things like that. And that made a world of difference. It helps you when you read something that you can connect with in that moment. If you're having a hard time, it really helps you get to the next moment. And as we both know, this is a one day at a time, sometimes a 1 hour at a time struggle. Now, if somebody wants to get a hold of you, how can they get a hold of you?
I'm actually not very good with social media, believe it or not.
Me either.
My preferred, or if you can, I will always follow anybody back on TikTok who asks me to, but Facebook is probably my main one, and all of my accounts are under the Girl Gambler. Shoot me a message on there and I will always come back to you. I still work 9 while 5, so I'm looking at actually getting some support in, because the messages are growing and growing, and I want those people to get help no matter what time of day it is. But if you drop me a message on there, I will always get back as soon as I possibly can.
Well, you did with me. And I have a 9 to 5 too. So here we are, trying to advocate for this, because we want people to know, women especially, that they're not alone. I really appreciate you being here. Thanks.
And thank you. What you're doing is amazing. It really is, and it'll help more than you think.
I hope so.